Even if you are old enough to have played fighting games during the mid-90s, chances are the name Bloodstorm is going to be unfamiliar to many who are watching this. I can't blame you either. Its developer, Incredible Technologies, wasn't exactly known for fighting games. Well, good ones at least. Also, there were a ton of better and more well-known fighting games released at the same time. You had Mortal Kombat 2, Eternal Champions, Killer Instinct, Darkstalkers, and those are just some of the ones I can name off the top of my head. Furthermore, for every Street Fighter 2, there are 10 more Doomsday Warriors. With all that congestion, how could a game like Bloodstorm not fall through the cracks? Let's face it, the game wasn't exactly the greatest fighting game in the world. However, it did add its own twist to the formula. Even if it wasn't enough to gain any commercial success, it was different enough from other fighting games at the time. This alone, to me, makes it another relic of gaming's past, unearthed in this installment of Gaming Archaeology. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. You might even learn something. It's not enough for me to simply talk about Bloodstorm by itself, especially like so many other games around that period. So little exists about the game's actual development. I also have to talk about the developer and publisher, Incredible Technologies and Strata. You see, they made a unique footprint in the gaming industry. Surprisingly, some of their biggest moves had nothing to do with fighting games at all. Like a lot of companies, they would experiment in a lot of different wheelhouses before they would settle on a formula that works. Bloodstorm was merely a byproduct of this experimentation. We'll go more in depth about the Incredible Technologies themselves later on. However, the story of Bloodstorm actually starts with another little known fighter, which the company also created. This game was called Time Killers. When Mortal Kombat was released in the early 90s, it marked a turning point for gaming, particularly for fighting games. While it's obviously pretty tame by today's standards, the blood-splattered combat and gruesome fatalities, along with the digitized graphics, were unlike anything ever seen in gaming up to that point. While there were games that featured graphic content before Midway's Fighter, the violence in these games was nowhere near as realistic as it was in Mortal Kombat, nor did these games gain the mainstream notoriety that Mortal Kombat did. Of course, like any trend, you had hundreds of games, especially in the fighting genre, that tried to imitate what Mortal Kombat was doing. No doubt while there are some good games which featured blood and gore, for the most part, many of these games were mediocre rip-offs that tried to rely too much on shock value rather than substantial gameplay. One of these games was a little-known 1992 fighting game called Time Killers. Developed by Incredible Technologies and published by Strata, Time Killers was a 2D fighting game that featured a series of warriors from different time periods. Rather than having high and low punches and kicks, each of the game's 4 attack buttons were tied to an individual limb, such as left hand, right hand, and so on. We'd later see this scheme in much better fighting games, mainly Tekken. It was also one of the first arcade fighting games to make use of weapons. Again, nobody gives a shit about this since games like Samurai Showdown and Soul Calibur would come along to blow it out the water just a few short years later. While Mortal Kombat had fatalities that you could perform at the end of a match, Time Killers let players cut off limbs during the match. You could even lose both your arms and fight with only your legs and a head. You could also end the round by pulling off a super death move, which would cut off both the arms and the head of an opponent. Of course, next round, any missing limbs would be restored as if nothing happened. A planned 1993 Genesis port was so bad that it ended up being cancelled, despite already having been reviewed in Electronic Gaming Monthly, only to be released 3 years later in 1996 under a different publisher no less. Somehow the Genesis port managed to be even worse than the arcade version. No change was made to the port between the 1993 cancellation and the 1996 release. Nintendo would also kill off a planned Super Nintendo port, but this was most likely due to the fact that the company was trying to present a family-friendly image. Remember, this was in the spring of 1994, and months prior, Nintendo had the developers clean up the Super Nintendo and Game Boy ports of Mortal Kombat, removing the blood and the fatalities. If it makes you feel any better, the SNES port will likely have been shit too, if slightly less shitty than the Genesis port. Let's back up for a minute. Let's talk about the developer and publisher of the game, Incredible Technologies and Strata. The two companies are basically one and the same, as Strata was a short-lived sub-brand dedicated to coin-op games. We'll get to Strata in a minute, but for now, let's talk about Incredible Technologies in general. Incredible Technologies should seem familiar to you, if only because you've seen their Golden Tee arcade games in bars, bowling alleys, and other places that usually don't pack mainstream arcade games. Incredible Technologies was established in 1985 by Purdue University alumni Elaine Hodgson and Richard Denton, both of whom are still with the company today. Hodgson had a degree in biochemistry and Denton had a degree in computer science and had formerly worked with NASA. The company had originally went by the name Free Radical Software. Free Radical Software was a developer that gaming companies would often outsource their work to, and many of their early titles were jobs for other companies. Among their early credits were the computer games Championship Wrestling and Winter Games, both of which they developed for Epix. That name should be familiar to those of you who watched my feature on Data East. If you recall, they were sued by the Japanese publisher over a karate game. Coincidentally, Data East would also be another of Free Radical's clients, as they would develop several pinball games for the company. Shortly after, the company would change its name to Incredible Technologies and enter the coin-op market, with their first release being Capcom Bowling, which they developed the hardware and software for. Of course, that wouldn't be the last time Incredible Tech would work with Capcom, but we'll get to that later. Incredible Technologies was a bit unusual for its time. Most gaming companies around this period, say Namco, SNK, or Data East, will usually start from coin-op and expand to console and PC, sometimes permanently transitioning to console and PC as the arcade market was waning during the late 90s and early 2000s. Incredible Technologies, however, would go from console to coin-op, which would prove to be more profitable. As they went forward, they'd focus on the golf and bowling games, which had more casual appeal, were more family-friendly, and were easier to play than the fighting games, shoot-em-ups, and beat-em-ups that dominated the arcades during their heyday. These days, if it's not a Pac-Man cabinet, you'd be more likely to see a Golden Tee or Silver Strike bowling game than a Street Fighter or Double Dragon cabinet. In particular, its Golden Tee arcade golf games will become its flagship title to the point where it will receive periodic updates and even a home console. But let's circle back to Strata for a minute. In 1990, Incredible Technologies would create the Strata sub-brand, which would focus on more mainstream-style coin-op titles. Under this label, the company would release a little over a dozen games, with classics such as Hard Yardage, Strata Bowling, the aforementioned Time Killers, and the ever-popular Ninja Clowns. The star of our show, Bloodstorm, was also produced under this label, and will be Incredible Technology's second attempt at creating a fighting game to compete with Mortal Kombat. Bloodstorm was billed as a Mortal Kombat killer, even releasing this infamous ad featuring Daniel Pesina, the actor who portrayed Johnny Cage in the first two Mortal Kombat games. Okay, side note, it's a common misconception that Daniel Pesina was fired from Midway because of this ad. I even got it wrong when I wrote about the game for Pilot years ago. Truth was that Daniel Pesina had already severed ties with Midway before making the ad, as he had sued them for unpaid royalties over the first two Mortal Kombat games. Also, Pesina was never officially an employee of Midway any more than, say, Captain America actor Chris Evans worked for Marvel. So how did Pesina get away with his ad? If I had to guess, the character in the ad is explicitly defined as Daniel Pesina and not Johnny Cage. Plus, it's not like anyone had a trademark over the shirtless with jeans, sneakers, and sunglasses look. Still though, this was a pretty ballsy move on the part of Pesina. On a related note, before reconciling with Midway, he and his brother Carlos will be involved with two other Mortal Kombat ripoffs, Atari's Steel Realm Fighters and Data East Tattoo Assassins. However, both of these games will be cancelled before release. Bloodstorm is pretty much a spiritual successor to Time Killers. It has some slight improvements too. I realize that's not saying a whole lot, but if you played both Bloodstorm and Time Killers, you notice that the developers tried to make at least some improvements to the formula. Where Time Killers was just a bad game, Bloodstorm at least has some comedy value with how bad it is. And for its credit, it tried to do a few things that were unique in fighting games. Look at it this way, if Time Killers was Manos the Hands of Fate of fighting games, Bloodstorm would be Plan 9 from Outer Space of fighting games, where it's bad but you like it because of how bad it is. The character designs are even more bizarre. It's as if they're leftover designs from some bad 90s Image comic. Seriously, take a look at some of these guys. Special shout out to the final boss, Necron, which is basically a giant broken Transformers toy with what looks to be an alien head attached to it. Bloodstorm takes place in a world whose emperor was just assassinated. The rulers of the world's 8 provinces get together to decide who gets to rule. Instead of having a, say, lengthy political campaign or deciding to form a parliament or anything else that always seem halfway sensible, they decide to fight it out to the death. I guess if we had a democratic election with debates and campaign slogans and all that, then there wouldn't be much of a game, would it? Just in case you get confused about the subject matter of the game, the intro depicts the Emperor in his final moments just before he's slashed to death with his intestines hanging out. Don't worry, I won't show that in the video. But yeah, this one is not safe for kids. They put a lot of effort in the Bloodstorm storyline. There is even a guide out there that goes into each character's background. But who plays fighting games for the story anyway? I mean, beside me, of course. Bloodstorm has a similar control scheme to Time Killers, with each limb tied to a button. And like Time Killers, you can randomly chop off a limb, although this time around it's a bit more precise, and it's a bit more clear when it happens than in Time Killers. Bloodstorm also goes a little bit further as you can perform what's called a sunder, where you can slice off the lower half of your opponent's body. The unfortunate combatant then has to finish the round dragging themselves across the floor, guts hanging out and all. You can even be reduced to a torso with no arms and no legs, but if you have the proper attacks, you can finish the round this way. Yeah, folks, this is perhaps the first fighting game where you can win a match as a quad amputee. Of course, the next round, if you lost any limbs, then you'll be good as new, making it even more hilarious. In addition, certain stages have traps where you can knock your opponent on and end the round quickly. The cavern, the one you'll most likely come across, has a giant spike where you can randomly knock your opponent and end the round within seconds. Whenever you win a match, you gain the character's weapon, or a gauntlet, and you can carry it over to the next match. Kind of like a bloody version of Mega Man. The cabinet even features the password save system. However, if the machine is turned off, you lose progress, so what's the point? Still, kudos to IT for at least trying something different. Like any good, and not so good mid-90s fighter, Bloodstorm contains several secrets to discover. You got big head modes, which replace the craniums of the fighters with those of the developers, and you got what's called taunt codes, which show random messages. You'll also discover several secret characters in the game, and unlike Mortal Kombat 2, you can even play as these guys if you know the right code. One of these characters is named Blood, who's a literal living gauger of blood. Another one of these codes also replaces the character's head with that of Senator Joe Lieberman. This made sense at the time due to his stance on violent video games. Of course, 25 years later he's still a cunt, so it's fun to see him decapitated. But be warned, there are tons of bugs and glitches in the game, and these codes can sometimes make them even worse. Although some of these bugs are pretty hilarious. Well, we're down to the million-dollar question. Should you play it? Well, yes. At the very least, you should check it out at least once, if for educational purposes. Who knows, you might even like it. I mean, I won't lie here, the character designs invoke Rob Liefeld levels of cheesiness, the game is a buggy and glitchy mess, and the combat system often relies on button mashing and sheer dumb luck rather than any kind of real strategy. To its credit, however, the gore and several of the glitches can be pretty funny. It tries to do something different with the mechanics that it introduces, and can decapitate Joe Lieberman and not get in trouble for it. And hey, at least it's not Time Killers, right? Obviously, Bloodstorm wasn't the Mortal Kombat killer we were promised, but it wasn't a complete dumpster fire either. If anything, it was only half a dumpster fire as opposed to Time Killer's 95% of a dumpster fire. You should check it out at least once, if only to get a few good laughs. I imagine it's difficult to find a machine in the wild, so while I'm normally against software piracy, the only way to check it out pretty much is on MAME. Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation ports were planned at some point, but they were cancelled. Bloodstorm will be the last coin-op game released under the Strata label. Incredible Technologies would head back to the arcade bowling and golf games that put them on the map, adding hunting to the mix with Big Buck Hunter in 2000. Later arcade cabinets would include network connectivity for stat tracking, leaderboards, and even contests. In 2005, the company would expand into the casino market, where the company has been ever since. In the late 2000s, however, they would make one more attempt at console gaming. Incredible Technologies would collaborate with InSpace to create a series of WiiWare games. One of these games was Carnival King, a remake of one of their early arcade titles. Another of these titles, Target Toss Pro, was basically a video game version of the popular backyard game Cornhole. However, before all that, IT would partner with Capcom one more time. While Bloodstorm may have been the last game released under the Strata sublabel, it wasn't Incredible Technologies' last attempt at a fighting game. In 1995, Strata would develop the arcade version of Street Fighter the movie, as in the Jean-Claude Van Damme flick and not the awesome anime flick. While it didn't contain the blood and gore of Mortal Kombat, it depicted the actors as digitized sprites, and it was about as good as the movie was, meaning it was absolute shit. So bad, in fact, Capcom themselves would develop their own version of the game that also turned out to be shit coincidentally, despite being different from the arcade game and actually having been developed in-house by Capcom. But yeah, this was an unprecedented example of not one, but two games based on a movie that's based on a video game. And once again, Incredible Tech was trying to out Mortal Kombat. And once again, it went about as well as you can expect. Maybe I'll give these games their own feature if there's a demand for it. Let me know in the comments what you think. Despite how bad some of their more infamous titles were, I'm not here to bury Incredible Tech, I'm here to praise it. To their credit, this is a company that was formed to pursue a passion, and they weren't afraid to experiment with different things. While some of what they tried didn't pan out the way they envisioned, they found their niche and discovered what works for them. As a result, they're cashing out quite nicely. Also, how many US-based companies can claim that they developed an actual Street Fighter game that was published by Capcom? Currently, the Chicago-based company is seeing some of its biggest profits thanks to its coin-op games and casino machines. While they're not exactly as well known as Namco or Capcom or Konami, they're doing quite well for themselves. I bet they could even outclass Konami if they started doing pachinko machines. Hey, who wants to see Bloodstorm Pachinko? As for Bloodstorm, it seems at first glance to be just another cheesy 90s gore fest that tried to capitalize on the success of Mortal Kombat. And yeah, it pretty much was. However, if you played it, you can also see that the developers were trying to make something special out of it. Who knows, maybe there's an alternate universe out there somewhere where Bloodstorm was a resounding success and Strata is as much a household name among fighting game fans as Capcom and SNK. Fans could be playing Bloodstorm 5 on Xbox Series X and PS5, complete with rollback netcode, and Elaine Hodgson is praised throughout the fighting game community as much as Yoshihiro Ono is. Maybe Low Tier God is even bragging about beating fools with Tempest. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, if you made it here, then thank you for sitting through another edition of Gaming Archaeology. I promised I was going to put out more of these. Of course, at the same time, though, it's like one of the bigger videos I put out, like not so much big as in timestamp-wise. I mean, usually I don't know how long these videos last until I start to render them, but usually when I make these things, it's like I usually have to, do the research, write a script, proofread the script, record it, grab some game footage, go back in and set it up, re-record some of the script lines, grab some more game footage because it doesn't show what I want, edit stuff, add in music, make a thumbnail, do the SEO optimizations, then publish it. So that's why that's why my output kind of slowed these past few weeks. Because these past couple months I've been putting out like 2 to 3 videos a week. Now, the only thing that I put out since then was like my new stuff. I wasn't able to do streams, but hopefully I can pick things back up after this. Still though, I did enjoy making this, and I hope you'll enjoy watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. There's not a whole lot of information about Bloodstorm as far as its development, so that's why I kind of like parlayed it into a piece about incredible technologies, because it's just like I thought it was interesting. It was off the beaten path. But anyway, if you like what you just saw, hit that thumbs up icon and let me know in the comments. Also, click the subscribe button and click the bell icon. That way you'll be the first to know when I put out a new video. I got several more on the way, including the first part of the King of Fighters retrospective that's coming later this month. So definitely keep an eye out for that. You're not going to want to miss any of this stuff. Also, I'll be starting my Twitch streams again every Thursday at 10 p.m. unless I say otherwise. So it is. Let me get my breath here. It's Saturday evening as I record this. So yesterday was my birthday, but the present is for you. So hopefully you enjoyed it again. But yeah, it's Saturday evening as I record this. So I just got to go in, make a few final edits, then encode it. And then by the time you're watching this, it's probably going to be Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon or whenever. So I hope you have a great rest of your weekend or week or whenever you see this. Until next time, I'm heydey 51000G, Ken, folks.